Today we are talking about ELO hell. ELO hell is a topic that's been around since Smite Season 1 really, and it's strangely highly debated most of the time. You will often have people coming up saying, I'm stuck in ELO hell and I can't get out because ELO hell is holding me back, and then somebody else will respond with, well, ELO hell doesn't exist, it's all your fault, you're just bad. Those are basically the two main arguments, and I think that's a view that can be expanded upon in some way or another. I generally don't believe it's smart to look at things in black and white, yes or no, when there are no absolute facts to prove either opinion. You have certain facts in life that are pretty much not arguable. 2 + 2 is 4, that is very much factual in most people's eyes and by anything we know, so that's simple, but we don't really have evidence of anything here. We don't have any research in either direction. So let's start with what ELO hell is. ELO hell as a topic is so popular at this point that it actually has its own Wikipedia entry. So the description here is as follows. ELO hell is a video gaming term used in MOBAs and other multiplayer online games with competitive modes. It refers to portions of the matchmaking ranking spectrum where individual matches are of poor quality and are often determined by factors such as poor team coordination, which are perceived to be outside the individual player's control. This ostensibly makes it difficult for skilled players to climb up the matchmaking ranking and out of ELO hell due to the difficulty of consistently winning games under these conditions. Its existence in various video games has been debated, and some game developers have called it an illusion caused by cognitive bias. What is cognitive bias? To put it simple, if you have a thought of how something is, you basically have your own reality of how a situation feels like to you, and therefore you conclude that is how the situation is. And when you get hit with facts that speak against that, then this cognitive bias is created. So for example, if you've been taught all your life that eating fats is bad and that fats are in any regard unhealthy, and then somebody comes along and tells you, fats are actually not that bad when eaten in moderation and should be balanced against the rest of their diet. If you have no previous information that confirms this at all, and all you know is that fats are bad and that's all you've been taught for your whole life, a cognitive bias is created. You'd be like, no, fats are bad. I've been told that fats are bad and I know that fats are bad. And then even if you're presented research that indicates differently, it will be rather hard to change your opinion. You can eventually change your opinion, but it's not something that will usually immediately happen for most people. And that is what is, according to some developers, the case here. You have this perception that you're stuck in a place that you don't belong, in the ELO hell, but according to the game and to the game statistics, you are actually exactly where you're supposed to be. Now, of course, that is something no one really likes to hear. When they feel like they're better and they're told, no, you're actually just as bad as everyone else around you, that doesn't feel nice. Now the question is it really necessarily true in all situations? And there are a few factors that we have to consider here. The most important one, I think, for games like Smite is that RNG is a huge factor when it comes to the early games. Your qualifiers can go very well or very poorly, and we've seen pro players start in relatively low divisions due to poor qualifiers, often having disconnects and similar, and that can kind of throw off the balance of where you belong for a while. Furthermore, the matchmaking after that is not going to be perfect. Matchmaking is something that is still in the works or is constantly in the works in almost every game, so we would have to assume perfect matchmaking to assume that there are no issues with ever climbing up. That's not the case. It's just more of a wonky thing. And that leads us to the real outcome here, which is that the system will be able to place you properly eventually, but the system will not be able to place you properly within your first few games. It can do that, but it's not necessarily the case. So what does that mean for us? It means that you could very well end up in a bracket that you don't belong for a while. You could either belong in a better bracket or in a worse bracket in terms of your ELO, or MMR, which is basically the same thing. So how do you fix that? By playing more. The problem that I see with that is that typically statistics don't even out that quickly. I think Hi-Rez once made this claim that it should take around 40 games to kind of counteract the RNG, the random luck that you could have, and I don't really see how such a low value would actually cover that sufficiently. In most statistics, you want to have sample sizes of like 150 plus-ish, if not more. Depending on how accurate you want it to be, you want to have a bigger sample size than that. You want to have 1,000 plus. And that would mean you'd have to play 1,000 plus games, which in most seasons isn't necessarily possible. Also, what's hard to measure is at the same time, would you improve during those 1,000 games to a degree that your placement would be significantly higher, and maybe your ELO hell would basically shift in that regard. And there are some other things that I find interesting in this context. For example, think of somebody who has bad luck, not in terms of the players they get matched with, but in terms of the role they're getting. Somebody who's getting support quite often is maybe not bad on support, but the team that he gets is not good enough to carry. And he would have won the game on a carry, but doesn't win it on a support. That could happen quite a few times in a row before you basically get out of that rut, depending on which other roles you end up in, because by the time it may balance itself out in terms of RNG, you might already have dropped a fair bit in ELO and end up in a division with worse players, making it harder for you again. At the same time, you'd also be playing against worse players, which should make it easier to grind up. That really boils down to one point. You have to be able to grind up on specific characters. I made a video on this in the past where I talked about gods that can carry you out of ELO hell, and I'm actually sure that that could be updated and could be updated frequently with new gods that have this carry position, but I think a lot of it will still hold true. The really important thing to keep in mind here is that climbing up is something that requires you to have a specific play style, at least until a certain point. You are not going to get far with coordinated team play with players that will not listen to calls, that will not follow calls, that will not make calls themselves or similar. In those situations, you're simply better off playing the ADC and blasting through the enemies as quickly as you can. And that, in my opinion, brings another issue. Somebody could be very, very good at playing carry, but very bad at playing with a team, whereas somebody else would be very good at playing with a team, but very bad at playing carry. And for the player that plays carry, ELO hell would be less of an issue because he's just doing what he always does. Whereas a team player could, for example, do very well in a division where people start doing calls and listening to calls and use voice comms, etc., but does poorly before he gets to that division or does worse in comparison. And you couldn't really see their full potential. Of course, they should still be able to carry themselves out eventually, but it would take a lot longer. Furthermore, this issue is amplified by any region that is not NA basically, because those comms will be significantly harder to even get to work because many people will not even be on voice comms, will not speak English, and all that stuff. You can see how it all comes together and complicates things even more. In the end, it also depends on how you look at ELO hell. If I was to start playing ranked right now, I would essentially be in an ELO hell compared to where I normally play. My casual ELO is high enough to play with people that typically have more understanding of the game. There's quite a few masters, quite a few diamond players around in most games. So if I go into rank now and I would start with a reset qualifier around low gold, silver-ish or wherever it places you at the moment, then the initial gains I would have would be a lot more frustrating for me. That says a lot, I guess. As such, if I wanted to go up as quickly as possible, I would have to change my playstyle, adapt to that level of play and play more self-focused, more egoistic, less team-focused than I would play in a normal game that I play most of the time. And that's interesting. I think it's just something that requires a certain level of adaptation, of understanding how the other players will operate in your game. And this can be very complicated. At the end of the day, I think saying ELO hell outright doesn't exist doesn't quite cut it, and neither does saying you're stuck in ELO hell just because of surrounding circumstances. Riot, the owners of League of Legends, for example, have said that ELO hell doesn't exist, but at the same time, they've also claimed that you require 150 to 300 games to reach your true matchmaking score. So in a way, those early games could be seen as some sort of ELO hell. More than anything, it comes down to investing enough time into the ranked mode or into the casual mode where you want to increase your ELO. This is an effort that not everyone wants to go through, not everyone has the time for, so it can be very understandable that some people get very frustrated with this if they want to have some of the ranked experience but not the consistent grind. Much more than blaming the game or the algorithm for what's going on, it's more about making the choice for yourself to say, hey, I want to invest a lot of time to get to my actual skill rating, or saying, hey, I don't want to spend or waste that much time just to get to this rating when I can have the same amount of fun in a casual mode or similar. This decision becomes even more interesting and more important with the ranked seasons being drastically shortened, which also kind of means that the placements are going to be different, especially if we see that placement reset every season to bronze actually happening soon. We'll find out if that's actually the case. I hope I gave you a bit of a conclusive overview that shines some light on both sides here and just puts it a little bit more in perspective to maybe understand each other a little bit better when it comes to stuff like this, instead of just being mad at each other for saying this exists or this doesn't exist. And if you're new to the channel and you enjoyed this, feel free to click the sub button, maybe the bell, it helps me out. If you liked the video, feel free to click the like button. If you disliked it, click the dislike button. And other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.